Welcome everyone to the Ontario Caregiver Organization's webinar series. These webinars bring together caregivers and subject matter experts to explore topics of interest to caregivers. We do this to support and engage chosen family, friends, neighbors, really anyone who's caring for someone else. My name is Katie Muirhead, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. And before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the lands that we're on today. While we meet on a virtual platform with people joining us from all over the province, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land we each call home. I'm joining you from the city of St. Catharines in the Niagara region, which is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendships of Indigenous peoples. If you'd like to learn more about the lands where you're joining from, you can find more at native-land.ca. So our webinar today is called What Caregivers Need to Know About Financial Wellness. 4 in 10 caregivers are facing financial hardship because of their caregiving responsibilities. Additionally, more caregivers are using their savings or investments to cover expenses associated with caregiving. This financial impact is one of the top reasons caregivers are feeling stressed. In this webinar today, we have Credit Canada here, and you'll receive some information on how to avoid bankruptcy, become debt-free, and achieve financial wellness. We've got Richard joining us from Credit Canada. And for those that are not familiar, Credit Canada is Canada's first and longest-standing credit counseling agency. As a national nonprofit organization, Credit Canada has helped thousands become debt-free and achieve financial wellness. So welcome, Richard. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to start by just thanking the Ontario Caregiver Organization for inviting me to speak to you today. I'd like to thank everybody who's attending the presentation live and also people who will view the recording later on for your interest in the presentation. So let's move through my slide deck here. And title slide there. So we are looking at various issues that we're going to collectively call financial wellness. Before I get into the subject material for today, I thought I would mention when we were setting this up that I have personal experience in the area of caregiving as well. I have had a parent with Alzheimer's disease, so it's not just theoretical information, it's things that I've lived this experience as well. Now, as Katie introduced me, or did the introduction there, so I work for an organization called Credit Canada. We are the oldest nonprofit credit counseling agency in Canada. We were originally founded, our original name 60 years ago, we were called the Credit Counseling Service of Toronto. Our mandate has always been to help people who come to us with financial problems to resolve those problems. And as we like to say, our tagline is to help people get out of debt and get back into life. Now, part of our mission, in addition, is to educate people on the areas of basic personal finance. With our clients, talking to them about what they should do and what they should not do in order to have problems not go and repeat themselves. And in addition to helping clients who've come to us, we are also expected to provide information. We're expected to work with community organizations, as I'm doing here today. We're expected to share the knowledge, what we've accumulated through our working with clients over the years. And that's where I come in. I'm in the education section of Credit Canada. And so we talk about some very basic areas in personal finance. And there's our agenda. It's pretty straightforward here. We're going to go through 3 areas where we have a lot of expertise. We're going to talk first about money management issues, and then we're going to move on to the world of credit and credit history and dealing with debt. And then we're going to see what kind of questions that you have out there. So anyway, moving along, our first section And there we are. We're into part one, into chapter one here, and we're looking at money coming in, money going out, the balance between the two of them. And I can just cut straight to the conclusion here. If you get this part right, yay, congratulations, you win the game of financial life. However, that's very easy to say, and it's a lot more difficult to do. So what I want to do in the next few slides here is give you a bit of an insight into what we see and what we think is worthwhile to talk with our clients. And we're going to start with a term, sustainable spending. So anytime we're talking about money management, we get into sustainable spending. So I am not, and the counselors would not tell people what to spend money on or how to spend money, what to do with the money. Those are your choices. Like everybody's got choices as to what they're doing with their money, and different people's choices are unique to the individual. So it's not a one size fits all world, you realize. But what we want people to be able to look at their finances and determine that they're not getting themselves into a long-term problem. So when I say long-term problem, I mean, I'm talking about debt, right? So obviously for a credit counseling agency, who do we see? We see people who have debt problems. And in the education area, we're trying to do whatever we can to, if we're detecting people on the path to debt accumulation, what can we do to bump them off that path? So that's what we call sustainable spending. And our method, let's just go over to the next slide here. We talk about the 3 steps. So we have a nice little memory aid, ABC. That's what we're going to call it, ABC. And we're defining them here. A is for analyze, B is for brainstorm, C is for change. And I'm going to just apply this concept in the next few slides here. So we're going to be talking about money going out and what we can actually do about money going out. So let's go over to, the fixed expenses here. What I'll do first off is I'm going to divide expenses into 2 categories. I'll call them fixed and variable. And we're going to do fixed first. So now when I say something is a fixed expense, that doesn't necessarily mean that the payment is going to be exactly the same all the time. It frequently is. But that's the accountant's definition of fixed. I have a little bit of a different definition of fixed. So when I say fixed expense, I want you to hear that it's the type of expense where you don't get to control the amount that you have to pay. Someone out there in the world gets to tell you how much you are going to pay, and your job is to shut up and pay it. So if you take a look at the bullet points on the slide there, you can see some pretty obvious examples of expenses that I'm going to call fixed. So we've got the housing related expenses, all of the utilities and different services, the things that we collectively call the bills, the insurance payments, the loan payments, everything else where there's a contract or an agreement that commits people to making regular payments, from your rent or mortgage all the way down to your Netflix subscription. So there's an entity behind all of these, from your landlord down to your subscriber, like your Netflix, that tells you how much you're going to pay, and you really can't argue. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about, well, first off, let's just bring in the little box over there in the top right, overcommitted. And we'll go back to ABC again. So A was for analyze, right? So anyway, we got the term overcommitted. This is something that we see too often nowadays in the world of credit counseling. People who often they have nice jobs, they have nice income coming in, and yet they have financial problems. And when we dig into what's going on with the financial problems, we find that too much of their take-home income is locked up in various expense categories. I mean, so and with our clients, we're getting to talking about brainstorming, we're talking about changing things. We're looking at canceling things, renegotiating, recommending that service providers can be changed in some areas. I'm talking about phone, cable, internet, even insurance providers, things that can be changed. For some of our clients, they get to the point where they realize that they have to make additional changes that are going to be life-altering changes. And that gets into, where are you going to live? What kind of vehicles are you going to drive? And that runs the whole gamut of the things we're hearing about nowadays. And we're hearing about people moving from homes they can't afford, or finding a roommate to share the rent, turning the basement into an apartment or an Airbnb because you need the money to cover the mortgage. So these are things that people are looking at to make choices that are going to be painful but beneficial for them. We can help to counsel people in making choices, but ultimately it's going to be every person's call as to what stays and what goes in the area of fixed expenses. So anyway, there is not necessarily any easy way to deal with this, but a lot of our clients, they've had to go through their fixed expenses, see what kind of choices they have there. Yeah, that's the fixed area. Let's go to the non-fixed. So if it isn't fixed, then we're going to call that variable. And so variable is, in my mind, it's any type of expense where a consumer has any level of discretion. If it is possible to pay more or pay less, either way, we're going to call that variable. I've given you a few sample categories on the slide there. You could probably think of a lot more. With our clients, what we would do is we would start by going and categorizing. You can make this, if you're doing this on your own, you can make it simple, you can make it complex. There are a lot of online tools. There are very, very good calculators online. There are spreadsheets. There are many resources. There are apps. There's more being created and put online all the time. So if you do a quick little Google search, you can find a tool that will help you to try to analyze what's going on. What does your overall spending picture looks like? You need to find a way of looking at your variable expenses that you're comfortable with. And moving on from this, my next slide is where we're going to get into running through that. I'm going to compress the ABCs and take a look at them all at once here. When I talk about variable expenses, I typically talk about a couple of terms, and those terms that you can see them in the title there: visibility and control. So put it simply, I turn it into two questions. Can you see where your money's going, and can you control where your money's going? Those are two really, really important things. I've got to tell you that every credit counselor has had the experience of being told by a client that they just don't understand where their money goes. They'll say that I've got a certain amount of money coming in. My income is here. I take care of all my bills, and the rest of the money just seems to dwindle and vanish. It just up and disappears. And then consequently, they're always broke. So that's telling us something very important about our clients and the lack of visibility and control. So we might offer up different ways of dealing with things. We can't provide people a perfect way of understanding where their money goes out to, but we can offer suggestions. And some of the suggestions that I'm going to talk about briefly here are more in the area of being able to see where money's going out to, and then some are more in the area of controlling where the money's going out to. So I'm going to run through the slide here fairly quickly. This is an area where I am going to encourage people that if there's something you're doing in your own personal life, I know that some people are using the chat, and that's great and fantastic. If you found there's something that actually works nicely for you, and you would care to share that with the people who are out there in the session there today, please feel free to do that. I'm going to run through a few ideas that, and by the way, we would not go through all of these with any one particular client. Many clients would never, they would never hear about these. We would choose them. We would be selective about who we would talk to about different things. But anyway, let's run through a little bit of enhancing visibility and control over the expenses. So anyway, up in the top left, we have the envelope method. That is one of the oldest ideas in personal finances. It's the process of just taking cash out of the bank, getting an envelope or envelopes, labeling them with expense categories, stuffing cash into the envelopes, and then living for a period of time of what's in the envelopes. And I think it does address both the visibility, You can always look in the envelope and say, how much is actually there? You obviously have the control because you're the person putting the money into the envelopes, right? So, visibility and control, and also it forces prioritization, where people are, you've got an envelope that's empty. Let's say it's the groceries envelope is empty, but you've still got some money in some other envelope. Well, you can lift the money out of the other envelope, drop it into the groceries. That way you can feed yourself. And what you've just done there is it's applied prioritization. So we're getting people to do little, there's psychological tricks you play on yourself. I don't know whether anybody out there would remember a TV show called Till Death Do Us Part. It was on cable TV up until a few years ago. You can still find the videos on YouTube. You can just go and search Till Death Do Us Part. But anyway, what that was it was applied envelope method. Go back and watch one of those. I mean, it was not using an envelope; they were using glass jars or clear jars. But the same idea. It was envelope method. Immediately below envelope method, prepaid cards. It's a variation on envelope method where we're really maybe a case where we're targeting a particular expense area and saying, okay, rather than have an envelope specifically for that, what we could do is we could get a prepaid card from the Shoppers Drug Mart, prepaid Visa, prepaid MasterCard, and that card is going to be used exclusively for paying a particular expense category. Let's say coffee, because lots of people out there just love coffee, whether you're a Tim Hortons person or a Starbucks or a Second Cup or whatever. I mean, for some people, what they're spending on coffee is way up there. And, we've seen the people in the drive-through in the morning, right? We know that, you know who they are. Anyway, in some areas, we're trying to just make sure that we got the visibility, we got the control. The other items here I'll go through a bit faster. They are more in the area of control. We got the cooling off periods, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. If you got an unplanned expense over a certain dollar limit, you set the time delay before you act on the purchase, whatever that time delay may be. In the right column up at the top, multiple budgets. Multiple budgets is a way of getting people to think a bit further ahead. What sort of things are coming up in the future that you should really be thinking about in advance. And that's covering everything: vacations, Christmas spending, unexpected things. There's going to be times a year where the car is going to need some work and whatever else you've got in your life that's going to need some money. My cat is going to the vet this Friday, so that will cost me some money. Anyway, so we all have stuff in our life that's has to be paid for, right? So getting people to think a little bit about things and determine whether you're going to find additional income to balance out higher expenses, find other expenses to lower to offset the higher ones, accumulate savings in advance for some of these things. So anyway, choices to be made there. The last couple there quickly, we've got $ equals number of hours worked. That is simply, it's a psychological experiment. It's a thought experiment to get people to think about how much they're spending. What does that equate to in terms of hours of your income earning life? And are you still finding that to be is that becoming problematic? And the last point there, leave your cards at home, is my shorthand for finding ways of slowing down the process of being separated from your money. Because the world around you definitely wants to accelerate that process, sometimes throwing a little sand into the gears in the machine. Very, very good idea. Anyway, we call this leave your cards at home because that was a time where a lot of our clients would be carrying far too many credit cards. Nowadays, I find some people they have too many apps on their phone, too many different ways of spending money on their phone. So throttle back in some areas there, try to hang on to a bit more money. We're going to wrap up the section on you and your money by closing out with savings. Just going to revisit the idea of ABCs again. Specifically, we're going to talk about bumps in the road that come along where life gets a little bit more expensive or a lot more expensive than you were expecting. And that, from our experience, that causes people to start going down that debt road. So the analysis first, problems are going to happen. We can't change that. It's part of life. But, can we change the extent to which we're prepared for bumps in the road. And that's really what this slide is about. And it's really about just one word, and that word is automatic. We just found that for a lot of people, they will agree that with the basic principle that they need savings. But then we ask people what they're doing about it, and it turns out that they're planning to save whatever's left over. And it's like, yeah, we know how that works out. There's nothing left over. The savings are zero. So on this slide here, we've got a couple of recommendations for automating savings. It may be a good idea to have a talk with your financial institution and see what they can do for you. And before we get out of this section entirely, one more comment about savings, and that's the power of windfalls. So if and when you have a good financial day in your life, the tax refund comes in or something happens, I don't know, whatever that might be, it's a really good idea to have a plan to capture that money, divert it somewhere where it's not going to be spent immediately, and maybe that can save you from a lot of ugly problems further down the line. Now, let's shift gears here a little bit. Let's go to the second part. Moving on from you and your own money, we're going to take a little bit of a look at the world of credit and debt, and then we're going to see what kind of questions are out there. So what we'll do first off is I want to make sure that you have a reasonable understanding of what is happening in the world of credit history. I'm pretty sure that some of you are already pretty well versed on this. Our collective level of knowledge has gotten a lot better. In the couple of decades I've been in this industry, I've seen people go from the typical person like, I have no clue, to nowadays a lot of people who definitely do have a clue. So I'm hoping this isn't too boring for a lot of you, but I got to tell you, there's some people out there who still need to hear this, need to hear a little bit about credit scores, credit reports. And so anyway, we will get through this quickly. But for the people who do need to hear this, first thing, how do you check your credit? Okay, that's step number one. Got to make sure everybody has a decent method for checking your credit. Before I get into this slide here, one important thing I want to talk about. If you've heard from somebody, they say, don't check your credit because it makes your credit score go down. No, not true. Okay, there is no effect when you check your own credit. If you're arguing with this with somebody, use the term soft inquiry, because that's when you check your own credit. It's considered a soft inquiry. It has no effect on your credit. And you should be checking your credit at least once per year. Everybody out there, if you're in this country, yes, you need to be checking your credit at least once per year. Methods. Okay, so I've got 3 bullet points here, and they're laid out in the order that I use for myself. So anyway, this is my tried and true methods. So number 1, we have whatever service is being provided by your bank. It might be through the website, might be through the mobile app. Check with your bank, find out if they're offering something, what they're offering, how it can be accessed. It's free, it's electronic, it's instantaneous, it has no effect on your credit score, and what they display. And I can't speak for every single financial institution, but the bank that I bank at, boy, they give you the information in a nice, neat, orderly, organized way, easy to read. And it's like, okay, no real excuse there. This is something that just, give it a shot. Next, we got the 2 credit bureaus. I've got the logos there for Equifax and TransUnion. I do recommend Equifax. I don't recommend TransUnion because as far as the last time I checked, TransUnion is still charging to get the credit score. It's $25 to get the credit score, whereas you can get it out of Equifax for free. If you are on the Equifax Canada website, don't click up at the top where it says $25 package. Scroll down to the bottom. You'll find a link down at the bottom on the left that says get my Equifax score and Equifax report online. You click on the link, on the next screen, it'll tell you that it's completely free. You're signing up for a free service. You actually create an Equifax consumer account. It's called a My Equifax. And I think it's something that's actually very, very useful, and props to Equifax for actually doing this. Anyway, I believe that between your bank's website and an Equifax account, you've got a couple of brilliant ways of checking your own credit. On the slide, I have also mentioned Credit Karma and Borrowell under other financial institutions. Personally, I don't use the apps for either one. I've heard mixed opinions about both of them. Some people like them, some people don't. If you find that they're great and wonderful for you, fine, fantastic. And if you want to check them out and you make up your own mind, you can do that. Now, when you check your credit, you'll get two things that come up. Typically, first that comes up is the credit score, and that is the number that indicates where you stand relative to others. And then there's the credit report, and that's the underlying information that's used to create the score. So what we're going to do first off, I've got a little graphic here we're going to look at very quickly for what's going on with the score. So I think it's pretty clear from the image there. Scores run from 300 to 900. Low is bad, high is good. The green area over on the right, that's where you want to be. 80%, though that green area, that's the 700 to 900 area. 80% of all scores are in the 700, they're in the green area. Okay, so that's what you're shooting for. Get yourself into the green area. If you can check your credit and you know you have a score that's above 700, well done, congratulations, pat yourself on the back, you have good credit. And moving on. There is also the credit report, and I'm going to recommend that you actually once a year take 5 minutes and actually go through your credit report. There isn't typically an awful lot of information there. I mean, we'll see if there's any questions. Once we get through the slide deck, we'll see if people have any questions there. But most of the time, I find that for people, I'm going to recommend you key on the third bullet point down on the slide there, the accounts reporting, because that's going to be the core of the information for a lot of people. What you're going to find is the organizations that you are doing business with and that have gotten your permission to share information about your credit usage with the credit bureaus. They're going to provide certain limited information. And it's going to mostly center on your usage of credit, things like your balance owing, your required payment, your payment history, the limits you are given. And some of that information is going to get pulled into a scoring mechanism. So there we are. We have an image. It says FICO score. Probably a lot of people have heard the term FICO, FICO formula, FICO algorithm, FICO scoring. FICO is an American company, and they invented the credit scoring formula about 60 years ago. Now, FICO never releases their actual formula to anyone. But what they do, in place of releasing their formula, they publicize this pie chart. And obviously, I'm using an image of their pie chart. So I'm going to keep it kind of simple here. If you want to have a good enough credit score, and when I say good enough, I mean 700 plus, you're going to need to focus on the two biggest pieces of the pie. So we're not going to look at the whole pie here. We're going to look at over on the left is that big blue wedge that says the payment history, and says 35%. And then the wedge that goes across the top there, the lighter blue one, that is labeled amount of debt. It's actually, to be specific, it's amount of debt relative to limits, but they've just abbreviated it here as amount of debt. And I'm going to take you to the next slide, and I'm going to give you the real quick lowdown on what's important, and then we're going to move on to our final section. So building good credit, rebuilding good credit. What you need is you need three things: activity, payment, low percentage of credit usage. Activity and payment, they go hand in hand. Okay, activity is evidence that you're not dead. You're out there. You're still with us. You are capable of accessing and using something that reports to the credit bureaus. You're not frightened of credit. You're not like, I will never use credit again. Even if you are buying one thing per month, going to your supermarket like on the first day of the month and buying, I don't know, like whatever a box of cereal, get yourself some cornflakes, okay, and some milk too for the cornflakes. So you get the two of them, take yourself up to the front, go pay for things with your credit card. That was activity. Congratulations, you did that part. What do you do next? You make the payment. You use it, you pay it off. Use it, pay it off. That's demonstrating evidence you can use some form of payment demonstrate the ability to make the payments when required. And then there's like that last bullet point there, the low percentage of credit usage. It just demonstrates that you're capable of keeping a prudent relationship between the limits you were given and the balances that you've accumulated. And this is where I typically say to people, if you can, pay things off as quickly as you possibly can. Don't wait for the statement to come in. Just, make your payment whenever you got the money. And that's going to be a very, very good course of action if you're building or rebuilding credit. So if I just go back one slide to that again, using it and making payments, that big wedge on the left, the dark blue wedge, you've got that one sorted out. And keeping the relationship between the limits and the debts low, that's getting that light blue wedge sorted out. That is going to drive your credit score above 700, or at least drive it in the direction of 700. And that is what you need to know about credit history. And we are getting into the home stretch here. We've got the subject of dealing with debt. So this is getting back to the land of an organization like the one I work for. We're credit counselors. And I have a slide here. I just title this as diagnosis first. So while I'm in the education area at Credit Canada, most of my colleagues, they work directly or indirectly with clients. And so when a client comes to us for the first time, then our phone rings or somebody contacts us through any one of a variety of methods. They contact us, and we only know one thing about them. That what we know about them is they feel they have a problem, and they feel they can't handle a problem. They're willing to talk about that problem with a complete stranger. We have no idea what the magnitude of the problem is. And I can tell you, I've dealt with people who had a very, very small issue that they were just blowing up in their own minds. I remember a young woman who wanted to know if she could file a bankruptcy because she was behind on her phone bill. It was like she owed maybe Rogers like $500, and she's like, "Can I do a bankruptcy and make the $500 debt go?" No, you can't. Bankruptcies aren't for $500 debts. Anyway, sometimes people have a small problem that they turn into a big problem. I've also seen the other thing happen where people have taken something that is, I would consider to be a really big problem, and then they've minimized. They're like, no, 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 Revenue Canada's not going to come after me. And I guess they will. Yes, they will. Anyway, so we don't know what the magnitude of the problem is. We don't know what caused the problem. There may be other things that we need to know about the situation before we can start talking about any kind of possible solutions. So, we're going to be looking at different things that we need to know. And I like to refer to this as doing a diagnosis. It's not much different than, the treatment you'd get if you went to, let's say, a doctor or a dentist, or any kind of professional who's going to be proposing a method of treatment. I mean, if you went to a doctor, think about this for a second. You go to a doctor, and the doctor doesn't do any examination. There, no blood pressure check, no temperature, no sending you to the lab. They just tell you that they're going to give you a prescription for their magic pills. I mean, you're running out the door at that point, right? Excuse me, but that's not what I wanted to hear. So we need to make sure we have a good understanding of what's going on with people in their lives. So we run through, obviously we're financial diagnosis. This is a financial diagnosis. So we're going to get into the area of finance. So we lead off, we take a look at income. Does a client have an income? Is that adequate for them, for their circumstances to live on? And again, I'm bringing this back to the subject of caregivers. You have not just the regular range of, of expenses, but you have additional layer of expenses on top of that. And when people are saying, well, they've got these things that are high priority, and they're like, well, what about my debts? There's times where, sorry, but you shouldn't even be thinking about paying the debts because the income is not adequate to actually deal with those. We also want to know things like, the income, is it a dependable or a precarious income? If somebody has an income, but it's bumpy, it's up and down, we don't want people going and making commitments to creditors to say, I will pay this much every month. But no, you can't, because you can't say that because you're not in circumstances where you would be able to say that. So there's the income. Okay, we got the income. We've got the expense side. This is where we spend quite a fair bit of time counseling. We want to make sure that a client, I mentioned before about visibility and control. Are they properly handling their expenses? We might be able to do a fair bit of counseling with some clients in some cases. But anyway, every situation has its own unique qualities here. And I'm sure you can all appreciate if you're attending this particular presentation from the Ontario Caregiver Organization that you have additional expenses. Well, I'm assuming, I would imagine at least some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yes, we know what you're talking about, Richard. We get that part about the additional expenses. So anyway, we'll be looking at prioritizing, seeing if anything can be done with your different expenses. We also need to take a look at assets, of course. Are there any significant assets? Can they be used in any way to mitigate a bad financial situation? And then, of course, as we're credit counselors, we're going to be talking about the debt situation. Is there debt? How bad is it? And that's going to take us into the land of the credit score, whether they're dealing with collection agencies. I do hope that none of you ever have to talk to a collection agent because that's one of the more unpleasant experiences of life. We're going to see whether people might be able to negotiate with original creditors. So there's a lot that we have to look at before we start talking about any kind of solutions. We need to make sure that we really understand what we're getting ourselves into here. Now, while I'm not going to get into talking about solutions, I do want to point out that there's plenty of people out there who may be capable of working out a course of action on your own. I'm sure there's some people out there who may be finding the situation is getting progressively more difficult. You should be aware that if it becomes too much to handle on your own, I mean, there are professionals out there whose role is to assist people who find that they are just out of their depth. But having said that, this is a methodology I would like you to look at in terms of, if you're trying to handle this yourself, or to understand that this is what a credit counselor or even a licensed insolvency trustee would be taking a look at if we're trying to determine what kind of options apply for a particular client. Like a doctor, we're going to try and minimize damage. So we're trying to minimize damage for the client's financial life. So this slide it's a quick summary of the lenses through which we would assess any damage that's being done. So we're looking at primarily two areas here. First off, we've got damage to a client's current living standards. That goes to the cash flow. What are they doing? Money coming in, money going out. What's happening with that? But then we need to balance that against the client's current credit position. So specifically, I'm talking about what their credit score looks like and what kind of potential damage there could be. There could be times where this can be a major consideration. I mean, what if a client has a mortgage renewal coming up in 6 months? Do we want to damage their credit score unnecessarily at that point in time? I mean, that could cost them a lot of money down the line. So perhaps there's times where the credit picture takes the preeminent position, right? So it becomes the primary importance. And then there's other times where, and I can think of examples from my own history in this industry where a client will say, what about my credit? And it's a lost cause. It's either the credit score has already, that ship has sailed, and in fact, that ship is sunk. Or there's times where the credit score may still be okay right now, but there is nothing that can be done to save it from upcoming damage. So anyway, in cases like this, we've got the third consideration of the future credit position. I mean, briefly, how long will it take before any damage that's being done now will get undone? And so those are the sort of things that we would, the kind of considerations that would come up in a conversation with a credit counselor. I am hoping that, most of you or all of you don't need to have this conversation, but I thought it'd be worthwhile to give you an idea what a credit counselor may be thinking about when they're looking at your situation saying, okay, what can be done here? Now, before we're done here today, we are getting to Q&A time. I think we're pretty much right on time for Q&A time here. But prior to that, we had agreed that we were going to make our financial readiness kit available to the clients of the Ontario Caregiver Organization. So if you're here with us live, I believe that somebody in the background is going to be putting a link out in the chat. It's probably going out there right now. Anyway, something is going out there in the chat. I believe that also that is going to be sent out post-webinar in the follow-up email. So you're going to get it a couple times. If you don't grab it out of the chat now, you can always get it in the email whenever that email goes out. If you are viewing this as a recording at a later date, you may want to just hit pause at this point, get yourself a pen and paper, and the link at the bottom of the slide there, that will take you to the financial readiness kit. And having said that, okay, so if you're back from pausing, if you're watching this as a recording, this is the last slide of my slide deck. We are about to go to Q&A time, but I will just quickly put up the main URL for the Credit Canada website and the toll-free number of Credit Canada, in case anybody out there does feel like they would want to speak with one of the credit counselors. Before we get into the Q&A, I'd like to thank everybody out there who has attended live or is watching this later on for taking the time to see what I have to say. And I hope that all of you got something useful out of the presentation. Now, give me a second here while I just hit the stop share. And Kate, can you let me know? I know there's been a lot of things going on in the chat there, so you can let me know what people want to know about.
Yeah, no, certainly I will, Richard. And thanks so much for your presentation. It was a really great, great building blocks for folks to think about as they're navigating through the financial space as caregivers and as individuals. So we did have quite a number of questions pop through. So I'm going to do my best to work my way through some of them. You were able to answer some as they were coming in, but we'll circle back to some and maybe lump things together. And I will just remind folks that we're not able to provide one-on-one personal financial advice to you, but we will point you in the direction of folks that can. So we did have a question early on around those elements of the credit score and where can people focus on in order to build that up, which you touched on in your presentation. So if the person that asked that question has some more questions about the credit score, folks want Richard to elaborate on that, feel free to put that in the chat box. And again, you will get the slides which Richard has so thoughtfully put together that will help you pick out those two sections of that pie chart. We did have a couple of questions around the caregiving experience that I want to dive into a little bit with you. And this is where we get a little more nuanced. So someone shared a little bit of their personal experience and others spoke to it in a more general sense around some of the challenges as caregivers is our finances can shift and change over time. So maybe we have a dual income household and then our partner's health deteriorates or declines, or there's a sudden change and that shifts things, or the expenses can be variable across time. And so I'm wondering if you have any tips or advice for caregivers when maybe those expenses are not constant or that income is not constant, and ways that they can maybe plan ahead or think about different strategies to support them in those types of situations.
Yeah. What comes to mind immediately is I'm going to give you a really quick sentence and then I'm going to build up on this sentence here. But what I wanted to say was build a buffer. So the thing is that there's nothing that I can say that's going, or there's nothing that anybody can do that's going to stop adversity from visiting you on its own schedule. That will happen, and you never know when, the anvil is going to fall from the sky. Okay, so that's just the way things are. This is the whole argument for having insurance. If you have a home, you probably have fire insurance on your home, right? But nobody's inviting it. Nobody's saying, let's have a fire in our home this weekend. You want to have a fire? Never. But you still have the insurance anyway. And so the same sort of thing where, again, we're talking about higher probability of having adverse events. like basically being ready before that comes. Um, Building savings plans, multiple savings plans. Um, in whenever there are some good times to be able to fatten up as much as possible there, and try to be as prepared as possible. But yeah, and I don't want to sort of belabor the point here. I think you see where I'm going to with this. You've got some sitting down and doing some number crunching to do there. What sort of things are likely to come? How expensive are they likely to be? How long are they likely to last for? And that should give you a bit of guidance in terms of building out that buffer. I'm hope that helps. So
Maybe that might be something that a credit counselor can support people with, even if they are doing quite well or they're feeling as caregivers that, things are moving along. I don't want to jinx it or rock the boat,
yeah,
but maybe chatting with a credit counselor in advance might be a strategy to prepare for the what ifs, to prepare for the
yeah,
maybes down the line. And I know that your organization has credit counseling. I believe your financial institutions can support you at no cost as well
yeah,
in those spaces as well. So there are places that folks can go to get some of this advice really specific to their situation,
yeah,
that's not going to cost you anything.
yeah. I am
Um,
also going to suggest that people talk to their financial institution as well.
mm,
And if you're not happy, I know there's times where people get bit short shrift. I'm not going to go and criticize any places specifically, but there's times where people kind of find that, oh yeah, like you're not walking in here with $1 bazillion. We're like we're not going to not going to go the extra mile to go and help you out there. There's times where it might be a good idea to look at changing financial institutions, or at least spreading your finances around multiple financial institutions. Look at credit unions as opposed to banks, for example. But having these, like I know, like I have this sort of image of a squirrel running around and kind of digging up people's lawns and stuffing a nut in there, and doing the same sort of thing, like be a squirrel. Anyway, let's get to the next question. I'm kind of
No, I think
dragging
I
this
think
one.
that's great. And there was a question that just came in from one of our audience members that I think builds on that a little bit. So what the question is really around after this talk today that you've given us a lot of the foundational elements and things to think about, what can Credit Canada do to support the people that have joined us today? So we know you offer credit counseling. You have that really great toolkit that we've shared out in the link, um, and we'll send it out as well as part of the post webinar email. What other resources can Credit Canada offer?
Well, I mean, we do have on our website, we've got a variety of information there on the website. I would encourage people to take a look at it. I would encourage people to look beyond not just Credit Canada, but also take a look at the wealth of information that's out there that has been created in recent years for, basic personal financial literacy in Canada. Now, as credit counselors, we're dealing with debt issues. And again, I'm rather much hoping that a lot of the people out there are not really mired in the sort of level of debt issues that we see with some of our clients. Again, what I do as an educational speaker is I'm trying to steer people away from that path, and get people to take action before they get too far down a particular avenue. So our counselors are primarily dealing with people who, if you think of like in terms of triage, we're dealing with the ones who are already pretty rough shape.
Mhm.
But anybody can reach out to any of our counselors. And again, I encourage people to seek information. If you are curious, good. Curious is good. If the toolkit sounds interesting, good. Go take a look at it. Maybe it'll suit your needs. Maybe it won't. But maybe it's a first step in a longer mission. So anyway,
No, that's great. I think it's helpful for folks to know that there's these resources and information on your site, this toolkit that can help guide folks.
yeah,
And as I always say, take what you want, leave the rest. What works for me may not work for you.
yeah,
And so you need to find that piece that fits for your situation and your caregiving role. And also knowing that there are credit counselors through Credit Canada, but also through your financial institutions. It won't cost folks anything is a great
yeah.
first step for folks that are starting to feel a bit worried. So I'm going to rapid fire through a couple questions because there's a
Okay,
lot of
good.
really great ones that are coming through. One is around credit score. If you have no debt, if
Mhm.
you're one of those, I'm not one of those people. I wish that I were.
Yeah.
But if you have no debt, can that affect your credit score?
Okay, so what the credit, I mean, I'm personally, I'm somebody who has no debt. But what you're doing is you're trying to show a pattern of responsible financial behavior. There's a lot of people out there who have a credit card or a couple of credit cards, as I do, and we use them and pay them, use them and pay them, use them and pay them, use them and pay them. I clear off my credit cards every couple of weeks. I don't wait for my statements to come. And I encourage people to do that, to pay more frequently. It doesn't make your credit score any higher, but what it does is it keeps the debts knocked down to zero. Knocking debt down to zero is great and fantastic. But what the credit scoring is looking at is it's assessing the probability of you become a problem. And so if you're somebody who has no debt but is paying things off, you're likely going to find your credit score is very high. So. So no debt is actually, no, that's a good thing. Yeah.
Okay. Because I've heard the opposite from like general people as well, which might be where the question from our guest came from, where
I,
no,
I, I've,
you need to have credit, you need to have something on your credit. It makes it, your
so,
score better, those sorts of
so,
things.
so I think just to make sure we're not talking about apples and oranges here.
Sure.
If we're talking about somebody out there who has no credit cards, no credit history, that's a different thing.
Okay.
To not be on the radar screen at all. Because if you're not on the radar screen at all, then if suddenly one day you're doing something where a credit check is required, and they find that you have no history, well, they have no reason to believe you're a good risk. So they're going to treat you as if you were a bad risk. And that's why for a lot of people, I'd say, have a credit card, use it at least a couple times a year. Go buy yourself a box of cereal, like literally a box of cereal. I know of a person who has a credit card for all he's ever done with a credit card is subscribe to Netflix. And so he
Um,
gets Netflix bills his card $17 a month and he pays off the 17. So it's 17 on, 17 off, on, off every single month. The bank doesn't know this yet, but he actually destroyed that card. After he set up his Netflix, he got a pair of scissors out, chop, chop, chop. But his credit score is comfortably in the 700s. So it's a very,
mhm.
very good credit score. And yeah, the world of credit thinks he's fantastic. And he's like, he pays everything else for cash, debit
Yeah.
card and cash. Yeah, so but he's happy. Credit world is happy. They can see something out there. So sometimes playing the game is good enough.
Yeah. So it's the difference is it's all credit is not necessarily debt. So we want to be able to carry credit to, exist in the world that we live in, but we want to keep the debt on that credit low or none, and that won't impact the
Yeah,
credit score itself.
yeah.
Okay.
Good
I'm
enough.
following. Thank you. That
Okay,
question was really helpful for me.
good
I'm going to
enough.
ask one more question before we wrap up. So I'm wondering if you can share your thoughts on what are some warning signs for caregivers that might indicate they're on sort of the brink of financial distress. So we're busy, we have a lot going on,
Yeah,
and we're just sort of automatic payments or picking things up or putting out fires, literal or
yeah,
figuratively. So we can't always be like hyper vigilant with our finances necessarily, especially those of us who are on modest to lower income.
yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you have any recommendations for caregivers is like, what are some of those red flags or warning signs that people should start really paying attention to as they move through their caregiving space?
Well, for everybody, not just caregivers, but for everybody, your financial situation never sleeps. It's there 24/7, 365, and it is always there for you to go and take a look at. And plenty of people have got themselves into financial problems. Now, I'm sorry to say, but for many people, they put blinders on. They've said, I do not want to take a look. If you want to find one very, very easy to spot sign. If you are using credit cards, and so we're going to talk again about, about debt and credit.
Mm.
If you take a look at your balance on the last statement a month ago, and you take a look at your statement on the balance right now, like the most recent statement and then the month ago statement, what's your trend line? Is it up or down? Okay, so if you're somebody like me who's like use it, pay it, like it's always zero, zero, zeros. It keeps going back to zero. But if your balance has gone from 200 to 400 to 600 to 800, I mean that's the sign. I mean that's I mean unless you want to have the world of credit drive over to your house and knock on the door and say might be trouble, but that's yeah, it's sitting right there. And like I said, it never sleeps, it never goes away. It's just there for you to look at any point in time. And your credit statements are they're ground zero for what's happening in your life.
That's great. Thank you. So we got to open those bills when they come in our mailboxes, which I know some of us are not great at doing, or checking those statements as they come to our email, and sort of staying hyper vigilant about the trend
Yeah.
of the debt side of things as a great starting point. So, Richard, thank you so much. We've had some really positive comments and feedback from the group around your talk today. And, one of our guests here said the toolkit looks very helpful, great starting point for everyone.
Oh,
So, I'm
excellent.
so glad we could share that resource with folks. I want to thank you for joining us today, speaking to the basics and the fundamentals of finances and financial wellness for caregivers. It's given us a really strong foundation and lots to think about and process as we move through our day-to-day lives. So thanks so much for joining us, Richard.
And thanks for having me. And for everybody out there, thank you very much for taking the time to watch the presentation here today.